Hey everyone, Master McMaster here. Today's episode is about sexual assault and sexual violence. Viewer discretion advised. Oh wait, no, this isn't a TV show. Listener discretion advised. Thanks.
BrainStorm. BrainStorm 9000.
Welcome, Brainstormers, to a brand new episode of BrainStorm 9000. I'm Master McMaster here with the ever-esteemed Dr. Schultz.
Who is not even trying to learn how to make this announcer voices that McMaster does all the time.
I mean, you're kind of good at it. Maybe you should. Do you want to give your announcer voice a try to introduce our lovely guest?
Hello, everyone. And let me introduce Hilary. Who is...
That was pretty epic, I gotta say. I love it.
Yeah, that was really
So,
good.
Hilary, tell us who you are, please.
I'm Hilary, and I am a psychotherapist who studied at NYU, and I also am a social worker at Bellevue Hospital on their inpatient unit. So,
And I can tell you, as somebody who knows your work, you are really good. People love you.
thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
I haven't heard a bad word about you.
Good.
So, from where I sit and stand and whatever I do, this is a very difficult topic to discuss. It's always been, not only in our society, in many of the societies, unfortunately, it's not even discussed at all.
Yeah. Yeah, so today we're going to talk about the stigma of sexual violence, specifically the stigma surrounding reporting sexual violence and speaking out about it publicly, even privately. Obviously, this is a huge topic, so that's why we're trying to focus, purely on this. And another reason why we're focusing on this in particular is because I, your humble host, Master McMaster, recently had a first-hand experience with this, and it was interesting trying to analyze my own feelings of going through the process. And so I am hoping we can all get some clarity and hopefully empower other people by all talking about why is this so stigmatized in our society? Why is there so much shame and embarrassment and fear associated with this kind of thing? And there are many, many reasons, and we'll get into all of that.
At some point later.
But yes, that is today's topic.
Yeah, so for people who don't know, recently the article came out about a number of things that were perpetrated by a particular person in Seattle a few years ago. And we all read this article. Yeah. Actually, it's two articles.
Yeah.
What happened was one day I walked into Jane's office and saw her very upset and asked her what was going on. And she told me that she just was reminded of something that happened to her a few years ago. And then it turned out that you were a participant.
Yes.
An unwilling participant, one of the unwilling participants. And the story became big. They asked you whether you want to be interviewed about it, and you were interviewed and wound up giving your full name, which is mentioned in the article. Mm-hmm. And then you felt compelled to talk about it to our audience because it's a very important topic.
So I gradually built up the courage to say something. And I want to say something right off the bat. What happened to me wasn't rape, and I actually have to say I'm kind of embarrassed to even be talking about this, like in the context of the other things that he did. And I just want to make it very clear that I'm not trying to compare like my experience. Like I'm not trying to put my experience on the same level as rape. But my experience was like weirdly upsetting and fucked up, and it has affected me.
Actually, I would like to say that I'm not even sure, and I understand that you are a nice person and don't want to be abrasive and aggressive, but I'm not actually sure how much difference there is between one type of violation of person's space and being intrusive and another type of violations. From where I always been, I think actually your case, as people are going to find out later during our program, although seems to be, I don't know, some kind of so-called soft violation, it's actually
Right.
very, very bad. So very frequently, and I know it from talking to a number of clients of mine, people try to suppress the experience, brush it off, say nothing bad actually happened, I didn't get raped, I didn't get hurt, I still can walk.
Right.
But it's not good enough. And I would like to draw people's attention to this because actually this type of stuff happens probably significantly more frequently, goes on unnoticed, and whatever minimal research has been done in this area shows that actually a rapist or a child molester, after they've been caught finally, have done it to approximately 60 to 70 people, and
Oh,
maybe even more.
Jesus.
So I would like people to be aware that this, in quotes, minor, end of quotes, stuff actually is, in quotes, major, and actually is very, very hurtful. And the person who is a subject to this type of violation might decide to brush it away, like you. I mean, you didn't brush it away, but kind of being embarrassed to talk about it, all these different
Yeah, I'm
things.
not trying to make myself sound like a fucking hero here.
No, but you are also kind of saying it, doubting whether it's, in quotes, bad enough to be brought up. It is
Yeah,
very,
that's true.
very, very bad.
All right.
It's
Yeah.
awful.
No, I guess like, you know, there's kind of no point in even trying to rank different
Yes,
levels of
yes,
violation and
yes, because
yeah.
violence is violence is violence,
Yeah.
and there's nothing good about it.
Yeah. So after all of this build up,
Right.
let's get to the story. So this is basically what happened to me. So the alleged, abuser, if you will, is David Meinert. He is a big fixture in Seattle. Previously, before all of these allegations came out, owned some of the most popular bars, cafes, and music venues on Capitol Hill and in downtown Seattle, which are the biggest places for nightlife in Seattle. Many people compare Capitol Hill to Williamsburg here in Brooklyn.
So Capitol Hill is not the Capitol Hill. Capitol Hill is a neighborhood.
It's a hill full of hipsters
Okay.
and dive bars, many of which were owned by David Meinert.
I have a good visual.
Yes. So, restaurateur, also a fixture in the music scene. He had a successful management company that managed, again, until recently, chart-topping bands like the Lumineers and Hey Marseille. And he's also well known for his involvement in local politics and, giving generous donations to politicians and campaigns and endorsements and things like that. So he is a very influential figure there, which is part of why this has become such a big story. So this is basically what happened. Sometime in July, there was an article published by KUOW Public Radio Seattle by the incredible reporter Sydney Brownstone. And it was about 5 women who came forward with accusations of sexual assault, rape, and sexual misconduct towards David Meinert. In this article, all women remained anonymous. The stories are quite disturbing and
Yes.
described in very graphic detail. And so this story was published. I had no idea about it, but several people that I knew when I lived in Seattle for graduate school, when I was there at the University of Washington, had emailed me the article and said, "Isn't this that guy that was creepy to you?" And I was like, "Oh shit, yeah, it is. This is so weird." Like, And then it kind of blew my mind because, I had no idea. First of all, I had no idea how influential he was. I didn't know what a big public figure he was at the time. All I knew was that he owned a couple restaurants. And I had no idea, obviously, that he had a history of this kind of behavior. Yeah. So I ultimately decided to come forward with my story. I didn't want my name in it. I just wanted to tell the story, get it over with, and I mainly wanted to do it because I wanted to support these other women to, provide additional evidence, I guess, that this is a pattern to sort of help their credibility or what, it wasn't about me or me finding closure. I never wanted to, I'm not involved in a lawsuit. I'm not filing any charges, whatever. I just felt the need to support the other women. And we'll post the full article on our website so you can read the whole thing if you want. But essentially, I first met David Minert when I was living in Seattle my first year of graduate school. And I lived down the block from the only remaining cafe dive bar that he still owns, which is called the 5 Point Cafe. And I used to go there all the time, because they had cheap beers. It was a good place to study. Eventually, I became a regular there. And, I was there at varying hours of the day, and I started to see him, he'd like conduct meetings at the end of the bar, and he started kind of like being like, oh, hey, like, what's up? What are you working on? With me reading a huge book. And he seemed interested in like, oh, wow, you're studying philosophy? That's so cool. He started chatting me up a little bit over time. Every now and then I'd see him and, we'd have a little chat. It was always super friendly, not creepy at all. And then it would be the thing where like when I came in, even if he wasn't there, the bartender would bring me like top shelf whiskey and be like, this is from Dave. And I was like, ooh, I feel so special.
Yeah, of course.
I'm a regular. I get these perks. That's so cool. And then, so one day when I went there, when I was like, had a very, very bad day because I was trying to find a good service industry job because I was making like nothing from my stipend as a graduate student. So, I finally found a job as a server. Long story short, it was extremely frustrating. I felt like I was making no money. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to be a bartender because it just seemed so much easier and so much more fun and so much more lucrative. And so he was there at the bar when I was there after work, and I was just complaining. He was listening. I was complaining about the service industry and how badly I want like a bartending job, and I just need something consistent. And, he was very sympathetic, and he then said, like, oh, I mean, like, I could probably get you a bartending job here at the 5 Point, or maybe you could get hired at this other place as a server or something, I'll talk to some people, and then you can send your resume over. And I was like, so excited because like the owner of this place wants to get me a job. Like, fuck yeah. I was so excited. And so we kept drinking. And at that point, it's not like I wanted to like hang out with him and be his best friend. I was 24 at the time and he was 48. So I was super stoked that he was offering me a potential job, and I finally had an in the service industry. And, I was telling him how much I love whiskey, but, I want to be fancier because I always drink like the bottom of the barrel, like Old Crow, which literally tastes like a dead crow in a glass. But that I wanted to like, learn more about the sophistication of whiskeys and flavor profiles and whatnot. And so we started doing like whiskey taste testing, and he was getting me like all these awesome fancy drinks. And then he was like, oh shit, you know what? There's a really nice whiskey bar in downtown Seattle that's, it's just like a short Uber ride away. Like, let's go there and I can show you like the really good stuff, and we can, you can expand your knowledge. So I was like, yeah, okay. And at that point, I was like, still kind of like, I don't know. But it was like, this guy is being really nice to me. He wants to give me a job. I'm gonna go for it. I'm just gonna go with it.
Yeah.
So we went and had a couple whiskeys, and at that point I was like, I'm pretty drunk, and I do have to work tomorrow, so I think it's time for me to go home. And so he insisted on walking me home. I lived, maybe 6 or 7 blocks away from where we were. So we started walking, and on the way back, we saw another bar called the Starlight. I'm not sure if it's still in Seattle or not. And he was like, oh no, we have to stop in here for a drink because you have to meet this person. Like, he might be able to get you a job too. So we stopped in there and had another drink. And at that point I was like, okay, I am definitely too drunk.
Yeah.
Like, I just want to go home and I want to go to sleep. So we went home. We got to my apartment building. Basically, when we were saying goodbye, I guess, he asked if he could come in and basically pushed me up against the brick facade of my building and started kissing me and, sticking his tongue in my mouth. And I was kind of like nervous laughtering it off, like,
Yeah.
okay, like, slow down there, buddy. And he was being very aggressive. He was very drunk too. Not that that's an excuse. So I kept kind of like pushing him away to get him to stop because I didn't want to kiss him. I just wanted to go home and go to bed. I didn't want to hook up with someone who was literally twice my age and had a daughter and so many things. So basically, I pushed him away and he slapped me in the face. And I was like stunned. And I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah, how else would you react?
And yeah, it was.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It was so bizarre. I was like, what the fuck is going on?
Did
And-
anybody see this?
Yeah, so, and that ended up being, I think, what really saved me from this situation that could have been much worse, is that I lived on a busy street, one of the main streets in downtown Seattle, in Belltown. So he slapped me and then, pushed me up against the wall again, more forcible kissing, and people were starting to look, and I was like yelling at him, like full on. And he was making it seem like it was like a sexy, like a power play, like dominant, like, oh, like he
Like a
wasn't doing it in
game?
like an angry way.
Yeah.
He wasn't like, you bitch, slap. He was just like, like, and they were slaps, but he was doing it out of a place of like, this is so hot, and I
Yeah.
was like, no, seriously, like, fucking
No.
stop. This is not okay. And then, I tried to get into my building and just like cut it off, be like, okay, I'm going to bed now, bye. And he tried to come inside the building and I was like, hell no. So stepped back outside and basically the same thing happened again. Started kissing me, like, please, please let me come inside. And every time I pushed him away, he slapped me in the face again. And I think he probably, I didn't keep count, but I think he probably ended up slapping me like 5 or 6 times.
Wow.
And he later called my yelling at him, telling him to fucking stop and get the fuck off me, a fake tirade that he thought was hilarious. Who knows? Like, if he genuinely believed that. Anyway, people were starting to stop and look because I was screaming. He was obviously like forcing me to do something that I didn't want to do and being violent. And, people started to like stop and look, and one person was like, do you need help?
Yeah.
And eventually, so then, around that point, Dave was like, okay, maybe next time, I'll call you tomorrow. And I was like, yeah, okay, whatever.
Please don't.
What's so interesting about this is I don't have any records of my texts with him because I deleted all of them for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But I did find our Facebook messaging history, and he had messaged me the next day, and he said like, oh, that was fun last night. It got a little crazy. Like, hope you had fun. And I didn't respond. And then he said, like, oh, I hate how you can see that people have read your messages and no one responds. And I was like, okay, You know, like, I still wanted the job. I just kind of like brushed it off. I was like, whatever, you know, whatever. I'm fine. I wasn't raped.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal, whatever. And so I finally responded and I was like, yeah, LOL. Do you remember slapping me last night? Because that was kind of weird. And he admitted to it. He said, yeah, sorry, I don't know what that was about. I'm glad you didn't kick my ass. Loved your fake tirade. Awesome, blah, blah, blah. And then invited me to come hang out with some of his friends. And I was like, yeah, maybe later. And he was like, good answer. And I was like, all right, whatever.
Yeah, so you brushed it off.
Yeah. So anyway, initially when they were going to publish the article, I didn't want to use my name because I didn't want, you know, someone to Google my name and have this come up and then have, you know, a potential employer or, you know, a potential like landlord or whatever Googling my name and the first thing that comes up is like sexual assault victim. Because, I mean, at the time I was thinking, I don't want anyone to know that. It's like embarrassing. I don't want people to think of me like that.
No, I understand why you feel that way.
And so eventually I told them that they could use my first name. My first legal name is Jenna. My middle name is Jane. When the article came out, I found out that there were 5 other women who shared stories in the article that I was mentioned in, and I was the only person out of 6 people who did not use their full name. And everyone was talking about what a big deal it was that these women were using their full names. And then I heard the reporter talking about why it's such a big deal that in this article all the women use their real names.
Yeah.
Because in the first one, everyone was anonymous. And in a lot of stories about sexual assault and sexual violence, they always anonymize the victims. And the way that Sydney Brownstone, the journalist who wrote the story, explained it really resonated with me. And she said, when people use their real names, it provides credibility. It puts like, you know, a face to a name so that you know it's not just some like imaginary thing. Like, this is a human being.
Yeah.
This is who they are. And this is what they experienced. You know, it's not just like anonymous. It makes it more
Real.
real.
It does.
Yeah. And another thing that she mentioned was that by using real names and, you know, putting yourself out there and speaking up, especially if you're like an influential person, you can help, that can help soften the stigma of all of this, of why people don't want to report. And honestly, ultimately, it was their strength and their courage to put themselves out there completely that made me change my mind. And so subsequently, I allowed them to publish my full name, which was a difficult decision to make.
I can imagine.
But ultimately, I feel embarrassed. I feel kind of humiliated now that everybody knows. Not that it was the worst thing that could have happened, right? Mm-hmm. But it's still exposing like an intimate thing, making me look like a victim. And I don't like the idea of people seeing me that way.
Do you regret it?
I don't regret it because, I felt so weird about the whole thing. I don't have PTSD. This hasn't severely affected my mental health or anything, but I do feel, especially in light of now knowing all the other things he's done, I feel kind of disturbed by the whole thing. And I feel so sorry for 24-year-old Jane McMaster. Like, I'm fine. But to experience that and then to just think nothing of it, which probably happens all the time.
It absolutely does.
Especially, going back 20, 30, 40, 50 years would just be like, nothing. But it really shouldn't be nothing.
No.
It shouldn't, it should be a big deal, because no one should be able to violate you in that way. Try to force you to do something that you don't want to do, even if they don't successfully end up, you know, doing whatever you might consider the worst possible thing. Like, it's not okay. And I still feel weird about it, but I want to work through that by talking about it. And I want to be one of those people who speaks up and is not ashamed of what happened, in the hopes that it will encourage other people to come forward.
It's like a domino effect. Like, you know, once one comes forward, then slowly other people come forward, and you guys can come together and, you know, fix an issue like this and start the conversation, because it is a hard conversation to have.
Yeah. No, and that's something that I was really thinking about, is, I mean, because I wouldn't have felt comfortable saying anything just purely by myself. I really only felt comfortable saying anything because everyone else was using their full names. And then honestly, I was looking at everywhere it was posted on Twitter and on Facebook and all over the internet, and like looking at the comments to see what people were saying. And to my surprise, there was no victim blaming. And all of the comments that I saw were very supportive. And, you know, there was no like, oh, she's probably a liar, and oh, that happened so long ago, so why didn't she report it at the time? You know, it was all very positive, and so I felt a little bit less vulnerable to potential negative consequences.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of people could identify with what you experienced, and people might not think that that would be something that you would report or would talk about, because, you know, just brush it off. But just even your experience and other women who experience that, you know, coming together and saying, regardless of what you went through, you know, you could still come together and talk about it.
Yeah,
and feel free to.
Once you put all those stories together, you really get a picture of what a predator this person is, allegedly.
Well, I don't know why we keep saying allegedly.
I mean, I think it's a reporter thing, but this is a podcast, so fuck it.
Yeah. I didn't know how deep we were going to go in there.
Well,
but...
how can you say allegedly if you were experiencing it? So
I was not allegedly
right.
slapped the way it was described in other stories. So this story has become a really big deal, and like I said, the fallout for David Meinert has been huge. He has, you know, there were posters put up all around Seattle encouraging people to boycott all the establishments that he still had an ownership stake in. Within weeks, he was bought out of those shares and is no longer like an owner or anything of a lot of those establishments. The bands that he managed all fired him. The PR company that represented him fired him as a client. People have really distanced themselves. Even the politicians that he donated money to ended up donating it to like Planned Parenthood. They're like, I'm not taking his money, not after what's come out.
Which shows how much other people even support, you know, this as well.
Yeah, and that this is only kind of a recent thing. It's like a building movement that kind of seemed to start with the beginnings of the Me Too stuff, right? I mean, that's when I first started to notice a lot about this.
So one of the things that is obvious is a feeling of being violated. You said a couple of times that nothing terrible happened to you, you didn't get raped. If you think about it, he still forced himself on you, and he still violated you.
Yeah.
And actually, he got kind of lucky. I've never been to Seattle, but from what I understand and hear from other people, it's a very mellow, laid-back kind of an environment.
Yeah.
If it happens somewhere like in Moscow, where I'm from, he wouldn't be able to get that far. And after the first sound out of you, a couple of men would come to him and probably some violent stuff would happen.
Yeah.
Being violated is actually a terrible feeling. I would like to share a story from my early life
Yeah.
when my father, who was a very strong, very, very strong guy who knew how to handle himself in many situations, and myself, I was 18 at the time, were spending the night in our summer house outside of Moscow. And because he was an inventor, he decided, for the reason he refused to explain to me at the time, install a very, very bright lamp. So in the middle of the night, around 2, he wakes me up suddenly and tells me, son, somebody's trying to break in. Let's come out. Grab a big stick. I mean, that's how I was brought up. And let's come out. Let's turn the light on. So we turned the light on. And when we came out, there were 2 completely blinded by the light people in their probably mid-20s, very well built, who apparently were planning to break into our house. First of all, they were blinded by the light. Second of all, I'm 6'3". My father was approximately the same size. Big, like ready to go in action people. It was very clear. We managed to call the police. We were lucky that we had a phone because it was rare at the time. So they came around, they got arrested. So basically, by any standards from any movie, we won, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they were going to do something bad still to this day. So I'm 63 right now. Many, many years later, 45 years later.
Mm-hmm.
I still get a very bad feeling when I talk about it because they did violate us. It was a big deal. Big deal.
Yeah.
They didn't touch us.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't touch our stuff. They just did something potentially violent.
Yeah.
So they broke in. In your particular case, it came significantly closer.
Yes.
So I can only imagine how terrible it must feel. And I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I'm just telling people that a lot of people I know are saying to themselves, what's a big deal? If something bad like that happened to you, nobody got hurt in the process, just try to forget about it, live your life.
Yeah.
Why stir the pot? Why bring out these negative emotions?
Oh, yeah. And a lot of people say, and even like younger, usually very conservative right-wing people say, don't make yourself a victim.
Yeah.
As
Right.
though if you tell your story and you don't blame yourself, that you're making yourself a victim where you don't need to. And like, as if you just brushed it under the rug and you never said anything about it, then you could still retain that victimless, untarnished view of yourself. So let's talk about some of the reasons why it can be so difficult for people to speak up, to want to speak up and share stories like this, or to report them even.
Well, first of all, they are going to label you. So people don't come out, as you said many times, and I guess we all understand it, just because you don't want this bad publicity.
Yeah, so victim blaming,
Yes.
fear of victim blaming is definitely a very real thing because we see that all the time. We saw it a lot with some of the women who came forward, in the Me Too movement, in the Bill Cosby situations, in the Harvey Weinstein situations, when someone comes forward about an assault, then especially if it's sexual and it's male on female, there are all the questions. Well, what were you wearing? Were you drunk?
Yeah.
Did you give them the wrong idea? Basically, trying to figure out a way in which
To rationalize it.
and basically to imply that the person could have prevented it but did not, and ultimately that it's their fault.
Right.
And that's just horrible, and it's so scary. And that was one fear of mine, because looking back on it at the time, I genuinely thought that he wanted to be a mentor, which looking back on it, I guess looks kind of stupid, but
But there you go. Why are you
everything's
telling yourself
but you know,
that?
I could totally see someone looking at this situation and saying, okay, so you were 24, you were with a man who was 48, and you agreed to go to several locations with him to drink a lot of alcohol and get drunk. What did you think was going to happen? You know, like that's something that crossed my mind. And I was just like, ugh, I don't even want to field that kind of conversation.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you, as somebody who is much older, that in many different occasions, a person who is looking for a job or is looking for protection goes along with the process of socializing with a person, male or female, or the same sex, it doesn't really matter, just because they think that this is what this older person wants. Feels lonely, maybe I remind him of his daughter. I'm not saying these thoughts were crossing your mind necessarily.
Sure.
Or is going to get upset, like, what's the big deal? The guy is trying to introduce me to something nice, maybe wants to see how we react in a social situation.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it can turn into something ugly. So yes, anybody can recall, maybe it's a broad statement, similar situations that happen to them one way or the other.
This article, like you said, it brings awareness to people. And even last night when I knew that we'd be talking about this, I spoke to my girlfriends and I was like, this is what me and, a few people are going to be talking about on a podcast. And they started coming up with, well, this happened to me and this happened to me in the workplace. This happens to me on the street. And they've never even talked to their best friends about it because they feel like it's minor or
Yeah.
it's not a big enough deal to talk about. And it obviously stuck with them. I mean, some things happened years ago, some things recently, and, it's still, it might not be traumatic, quote unquote, but, it's still affecting their interactions with people and their hypervigilance, like how you've talked about. So I think it is a great way to just, open up the conversation about it and reduce the stigma about talking about it, because I think it's good for mental health to process it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you were saying about a lot of people being like, oh, yes, like this happened to me, but, it wasn't that big a deal. One of the things that one of the women in this article that I was in said that resonated with me so much is that in this society, women are raised to believe that they should feel lucky that it wasn't worse. That like unless it was the worst possible thing you could imagine happening to you, it's like, you're still alive, you're still here, you're still breathing, it's fine. And I even feel weird even putting like my story next to what happened to these other women because I keep wanting to minimize it and being like, it's not a big deal. I'm fine. Everything's fine. Like, but it should be a big deal.
It's still a footprint. That experience is still a footprint in your life that is going to leave something. And, whether it be a bigger one than another person's, it still matters.
Yeah.
Have you ever had to interview people after sexual abuse?
Yeah, I have. And a lot of the time, it takes a really long time for them to come forward.
Right.
Actually, a lot of people that I see privately will come to me and years later and say, I've never told anybody about this, but this happened to me, and for some reason I repressed it or never felt like it was a big enough deal to talk about, but I can't stop thinking about it. I'm fearful of what other people will think of me when I tell them, and I just am all ears when they're telling me this, because you can tell that if it was minor, it still holds a really big significant piece of themselves that they might have lost or that they've, still not totally processed. So it's an intense experience to hear other people's, forthcoming about it. But I think it's important that we're all supportive no matter what happened to them and how long ago it happened and with whom it happened to still be there and listen to them about it.
And I think that can be as far as like trying to make progress, and I think we're already starting to make progress with the Me Too movement and all of these celebrities and like big public figures speaking out, like that kind of thing gives people the courage to come forward and to speak up. But yeah, so one thing that I think is really important that people can do to continue to make progress is if you know someone who has experienced sexual violence, sexual assault, anything like that, the most important thing is to support them and to speak out. A lot of people are embarrassed for them. They don't want to be associated with that.
I think a lot of people think that sexual violence or assault or anything of that nature comes with the word like baggage, and that's why they don't want to talk about it, because they don't want other people to see them as, oh, they had this happen to them, so they have this heavy, emotional, psychological baggage with them.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have been talking about it more, and how, even with like dating and going on job interviews, and people search you. And I mean, obviously with something big that's in the, news now, but even in regular social interactions, and if you forthcome to someone like, oh, this happened to me, people are scared of how they will react to them because that happened to them. So it's just,
Right.
It's sad.
And it can change how someone perceives you.
Absolutely.
Because this stigma is still very real. Even the idea, I think, of other people thinking of you in a sexual context, it feels very humiliating.
I mean, I think that, it's hard, maybe depending on what happens to you, to come forth about it right away.
Yeah.
I mean, whether you report it to a police officer, just make a phone call about something that had happened to you, or just honestly talking to your friend about it. I think talking about it and processing it is really important, because when you're just sitting there and then all the negative thoughts come in and you're blaming yourself, what could you have done differently to make this not happen to you? And I just think it's how we kind of go on that negative downward spiral in situations like that. So I think it is very important to talk about it. And, I give credit, and I think you guys are all courageous for coming forward with your story and talking about it, because I think it helps people who aren't, like this is a famous person that it's happening to, or a well-known person. And it makes people who aren't in a situation with someone like that feel more comfortable about talking about it in a more generalized, social situation with girlfriends, guy friends, just in a social setting. So thank you guys for sharing your story like that. And,
Thank you very much.
it gives everybody else a voice.
I don't know how to react to that, because I'm just awkward about this stuff, but I do appreciate all the support that I've gotten from people, yourselves included. To anyone else out there who has experienced some form of sexual violence, you are not alone.
Yeah, and I think it's a very positive statement on which we can end this very painful conversation, which is very necessary. In this case, no pain, no gain.
Exactly. That's the name of the game, y'all.
Yeah. So I hope the stuff at some point stops, but not anytime soon. We just need to keep talking about it and bringing it to everybody's attention. Maybe we should give people some, at least, helpful number that they can call.
Yeah, so if you guys ever do want to talk about it or report anything, you can call RAIN. It's the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. You can call 1-800-656-HOPE. So it's 1-800-656-4673. It's 24 hours a day. And there's an online chat available as well. Also, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-SAFE. So always feel free to call them. You can call anonymously. You can call and say your name, but someone to talk to about what has ever happened to you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for listening. To
Thank
be
you.
continued.
Yeah, thanks for being here with us, Hilary.
I was honored. Thanks for
Thank you.
having me.
Thank you. We hope to have you back.
Yes, would love
sometime
to.
soon.
So that's it for this week, everyone. Join us next week for a brand new episode of BrainStorm 9000.
And please, Keep your brains open. Signing off, a person whose nickname is Dr. Schultz.
And a person whose real name is Master McMaster.
Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to another episode of BrainStorm 9000. If you like us, love us, or marginally tolerate us, hey, go ahead and subscribe, rate, and give us a review on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever the hell you listen to your podcasts.